Picture a bar in Los Gatos, California, 1975. A copywriter named Gary Dahl is sitting with friends who are complaining about their pets, the vet bills, the mess, the noise. And Dahl, half joking, says, "What if you just had a rock? No feeding, no walking, no vet, just a rock." Most people laugh and forget it by morning. Dahl went home and turned it into $4 million in 6 months. That is the thing about bizarre money-making tactics. The ones that look the most ridiculous on the surface are often the ones hiding the clearest logic underneath, and that is exactly what we are digging into today. Before we get into the list, you need to understand the world these hustles came out of. Most of them were born in eras when there was no safety net, no gig app, no side hustle podcast telling you what to do. People in the Depression, the post-war years, the 1970s recession, they were not waiting for permission. They looked at what they had, what people around them needed or wanted or found funny, and they built something out of that gap. They did not have apps. They had resourcefulness. That is the thread running through every single one of these 20 tactics. So let's start with Gary Dahl and the pet rock. He sourced smooth stones from Rosarito Beach in Mexico, packed them into a cardboard box with actual breathing holes cut into the sides, and included a 32-page training manual explaining how to teach your rock to sit and stay. The rock sold for $3.95 each. Between August 1975 and early 1976, he moved somewhere between 1.3 and 1.5 million units. The cost of goods was essentially zero. The value was entirely in the story, the packaging, and the joke. This is the purest example of selling an idea rather than an object. Now jump forward 40 years to 2015. A guy named Alex Craig is working a regular job and decides to start mailing anonymous messages written directly onto potatoes. He called it Potato Parcel. The potatoes cost him well under $1 each. He charged customers $8 to $10 per potato delivered. In the first 13 months, he pulled in over $200,000 in sales. He eventually went on Shark Tank in 2016 and landed a $50,000 investment from Kevin O'Leary for 10% of the company. Same structure as the pet rock. Cheap commodity, personal touch, strong gimmick. Old hustle, new money. Here is one that goes back much further than most people realize. Worm farming. In the 1950s and 1960s, classified ads in fishing and farming magazines were promising readers they could earn $10,000 to $50,000 per acre per year raising earthworms for bait shops. The truth was more complicated. Independent investigations found those numbers were wildly exaggerated, and a lot of the worm farm business opportunities were closer to pyramid-style buyback schemes than honest trades. But here is what is real. Ordinary rural families who quietly collected and sold worms to local bait shops did make a few hundred to a few $1,000s per season, no hype required. The lesson in the worm farming story is one that keeps showing up in this list. The real money was not always in the product. It was in selling the dream of the product. Promoters got rich selling starter kits and instruction booklets to people who wanted to believe in the hustle. The guys actually selling worms to bait shops made modest, honest side income. That distinction matters. Every era has its version of this, and knowing which side of that line you are standing on is the difference between building something real and just buying into someone else's scheme. Professional line sitting. This one sounds like a joke until you see the numbers. Companies like Same Old Line Dudes in New York City were charging clients $25 per hour and up to hold spots in line for product launches, Broadway shows, and government offices. For a single overnight iPhone launch or a high-demand Supreme Court hearing, individual line sitters reported earning between $200 and $1,000 for one job. No degree, no tools, no inventory, just your body, your time, and the willingness to sit on a sidewalk when someone else could not. This one got buried, but it never stopped working. Now here is one that takes the pet rock concept and strips it down to its most absurd possible form. Selling air. In 2014, a Canadian company called Vitality Air began bottling fresh mountain air from Banff and Lake Louise and selling it to customers in China for around $20 a bottle. Similar novelty sellers marketed Brooklyn Air, Paris Air, and New York City Air in jars as gag gifts priced between $10 and $40 each. The main costs were the containers, the label, and the shipping. The margins were extraordinary. This is essentially the pet rock model applied to something you cannot even see. Let's talk about haunted items, because this one has a lineage that goes all the way back to Victorian spiritualist fairs. In the early 2000s, eBay became a marketplace for supposedly haunted dolls, paintings, and antiques. One famous case was a painting called The Hands Resist Him, made by artist Bill Stoneham in 1972. When it was listed online with an eerie backstory about strange phenomena, it drew intense bidding attention and national media coverage. Ordinary thrift store dolls with a compelling ghost story attached were regularly selling in the $400 to $1,000 range. The object barely mattered. The narrative was the entire product. In 2001, a man named Ken Aroni looked at a Thanksgiving table and saw a problem nobody had ever tried to fix. There is only one wishbone per turkey, and there are always more family members than wishes. So he founded the Lucky Break Wishbone Corporation and began manufacturing plastic wishbones so every person at the table could participate in the ritual. By the late 2000s, the company was reportedly producing millions of plastic wishbones annually and selling them through catalogs and retailers nationwide. He took something people had always received for free once a year and turned the scarcity of it into a business. That is a genuinely underappreciated move. Here is the pattern hiding inside the wishbone story and the pet rock and the canned air. These people were not inventing needs. They were finding small friction points inside rituals and traditions that already existed, and they were inserting a low-cost product into that gap. One wishbone, not enough for everyone at the table. That is the friction. A plastic wishbone for $1 fixes it. The question Randy should be asking is, what are the small, recurring annoyances inside the traditions and routines of the people around me? And what is the cheapest possible thing that makes that friction go away? Now let's go to the streets, literally. Scrap and junk picking has been a legitimate income stream since at least the 19th century, when rag and bone men worked the streets of American and British cities collecting discarded materials for resale. In post-war America, mass consumerism created enormous waste streams, and savvy pickers turned those streams into inventory. In New York and other major cities during boom periods, experienced scrap pickers reported earning $100 to $200 a day collecting metal, furniture, and recyclables. Some individuals who specialized in thrown-out office furniture and electronics in the 1990s built six-figure resale businesses from what their neighbors called trash. The scrap hustle works for Randy specifically because the barriers to entry are almost zero. If you have a truck and a few hours on a weekend, you have the infrastructure. The word-of-mouth piece is where it compounds. Once a neighborhood knows you haul junk, you stop hunting for inventory, and inventory starts calling you. Construction sites, office building cleanouts, estate sales, apartment turnovers. These are all waste streams that generate usable material constantly. The squeamishness most people feel about picking through discarded items is the only thing protecting the margins of the people who do not feel that way. Renting out backyard chickens. This sounds like something invented by a Brooklyn startup, but the informal version of this has existed in rural communities for generations. Neighbors sharing hens, trading eggs, lending a rooster for a season. The branded modern version. A company called Rent the Chicken founded in Pennsylvania in 2013 formalized that old practice. They delivered 2 laying hens, a coop, and all the supplies to suburban families for a season. Packages ran $400 to $600 or more for a 6-month rental. The same hens could be rented to a new family the following season, which dramatically improved the return on each bird. The chicken rental model is interesting because it solves a commitment problem. Suburban families in the 2010s were curious about backyard egg production, but did not want to own chickens permanently. The rental let them try before they committed. That try before you commit structure is not new. Depression-era communities did versions of this with tools, draft animals, and equipment all the time, sharing access to things that were too expensive to own individually. The packaging changed. The underlying economic logic is at least 100 years old. Your grandparents already solved this problem. We just stopped listening. Professional cuddling. I know how that sounds, so let's just look at the numbers first. Businesses like Cuddle Up to Me in Portland, Oregon, and independent practitioners in multiple American cities were charging $60 to $80 per hour for non-sexual, platonic cuddling sessions by the early 2010s. The skill required is essentially emotional steadiness and clear personal boundaries, not a technical trade. What makes this historically interesting is that paid human companionship and comfort services are not new at all. Victorian-era hired mourners, paid sitters, professional companions for the elderly. These roles have existed in various forms for well over a century. Cat cafes. The first one opened in Taipei, Taiwan in 1998. The concept spread to Japan in the 2000s and arrived in the United States with Cat Town Cafe in Oakland, California in 2014. Visitors paid an entry fee of roughly $10 to $20 per hour to sit with adoptable rescue cats, on top of purchasing food and drinks. What they were buying was not coffee. They were buying access to animals they did not own, the experience of animal companionship without the long-term cost. Scale this down and you get goat yoga, farm visits, and informal petting experiences that rural and semi-rural operators have been running informally for decades. Now here is one worth sitting with for a moment. In the late 2000s, an entrepreneur named Jerry Lucas created a service called myexcusedabsence.com that sold customized excuse letters written on fake professional letterhead for around $25 each. He claimed to have written hundreds of notes. I am not recommending this. It is ethically and legally problematic, and that is exactly why it is on this list. Because the underlying need it was exploiting, people will pay to outsource uncomfortable conversations, is completely legitimate. Bill negotiation services, complaint letters, refund requests written on behalf of customers who do not know how to push back. That is a real, honest version of the same pattern. Step back and look at all 20 of these together, and a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The pet rock, the potato messages, the haunted dolls, the canned air, the plastic wishbones, the rented chickens. None of them required a college degree. None of them required a storefront or a startup fund. Every single one of them started with one person looking at something ordinary, something cheap or free or overlooked, and asking a question most people never bother asking. What would someone pay for this if I told them the right story? The tactics look bizarre. The logic underneath them is completely straightforward. That is the whole game. Here is what I want you to take away from this one. Pick 2 or 3 of these that made you stop and think, not the ones that made you laugh, the ones that made you pause. That pause is your brain recognizing a pattern it already understands, but has not named yet. The worm farming lesson about selling the dream versus the product. The scrap hustle lesson about waste streams and word of mouth. The wishbone lesson about friction points inside existing rituals. These are not trivia. They are frameworks that regular working people use to build real extra income without waiting for anyone to hand them a system. If it worked during the Depression, it is worth a second look. And if you want more of these, subscribe because we are just getting started.